But anyway, so the Enterprise turns and flies full blast away from the thing out there in space. But the thing just formed itself into a sphere and pursues after the Enterprise. Once again, this is Q's playful way of playing along with Picard's delusion that Q is on that ship or that in some way that's connected with Q. Now, I find it interesting. Here is a spherical object in Star Trek that represents a god figure. And the same thing has happened in other Star Treks. So in Star Trek Enterprise, the god figures in the expanse are the sphere builders, and the spheres are considered sacred objects in a way not unlike to how some cultures might think about their shrines or their temples or their idols that are sacred because they somehow reflect the nature or the involvement of the god or the gods. Similarly, in Deep Space Nine, the prophets have revealed themselves with orbs. Now, the orbs aren't spherical. They're kind of hourglass shaped, it looks like, and they're always kept in these more or less cubical or cylindrical containers. However, the word orb kind of refers to a round object, and that's the same word that's used to refer in the world of UFOlogy. Orb is the word that's used to refer to these purported spherical sightings of things that are associated with UFOs and tend to be thought of as a mix of an alien and a god figure or a spirit of some kind. And I'm getting this secondhand because I'm not really in the world of UFOlogy type stuff. But apparently it's all the rage in the UFO alien abduction type discussions. So while I don't know a lot about that, but you definitely get the feeling that people that talk about these feel about these orbs like they're sort of a god figure or a spiritual being, but they're aliens and they're spherical. So anyway, so here in Star Trek, a god is a sphere in this episode here. And then to tie all these concepts together, all these different orb with god figure, spiritual type stuff, to tie them all together, we could say maybe all these together have some kind of connection with the fact that the sun in the sky is a sphere, is an orb. And throughout all of human history to ancient times, the sun has been associated with the divine in some way or other, whether through actually worshiping the sun as a god or by identifying the sun as something that shows us the glory of God in some way, let's say. You might remember, to bring in Star Trek again, you might remember in the original series of Star Trek, there was that episode where they even made specifically Christians, they had it sort of as sun worshippers, or at least it seemed like that for most of the episode. You got the impression you thought this alien religion that they worshipped the sun in the sky, because when they talked about the sun, they would look up and point at the sun, or point at the sky at least. But then near the end of the episode, Uhura reveals in the end that no, they were actually talking about sun as in the Son of God. So this was the one time when Christianity is explicitly identified in Star Trek. Of course, this wasn't Earth; it was a parallel evolving planet. So, but anyway, that was their portrayal of Christianity. And they had this ambiguity that they played on between sun and sun. And they didn't do that without reason, because while Christians are very adamantly not sun worshippers, yet God is the God of the heavens, i.e. the sky. And God has always been associated with the sky and with the lights of the sky, such as the stars, and then just as a natural corollary, the great light, which is the sun. The moon has also been associated with spirituality on different levels, both as a god in many polytheistic religions and then as a reflection of the glory of the monotheistic God in those religions. Though, as an interesting side note on that bit, I've also seen the moon used in association with Satan, particularly in some song lyrics that are built from classical themes. And I think that the influence that's coming through there, I think it goes back to the Faust story and that really famous line, dancing with the devil in the pale moonlight. So the moon, probably partly because the moon does give you a sense of connection with the divine or the spiritual, same as the heavenly bodies, the sky and the sun. It does the same thing. But the moon is also associated with the night and with all the superstitious associations of things like the full moon, etc. But the end result is that even though the moon would be connected with God and spirituality in much the same way the sun is and the stars, but there's also this, I think it's more of a recent modern classical association of the moon with Satan or with a devil figure like Mephistopheles from the Faust story. And I think it comes from that Faust story because I think that's connected with the part where Faust makes a deal with the devil. And I think there's an idea where that sense of transcendence is part of the great deception of Mephistopheles in gaining the admiration and kind of, in a sense, the worship of Faust, I imagine. So we'd say in terms of orb, both orbs have a lot of spiritual significance, in the real orbs in the sky, I mean. So anyway, long story short, it's kind of intriguing to have Q manifest himself in outer space through an object that very quickly becomes a sphere or an orb while it chases the Enterprise. It's a shape that we might expect to be used to manifest a god figure in the Star Trek universe, or possibly even a devil figure, just the same as the sphere builders in Enterprise Season 3. They were kind of gods, but they were also kind of devil figures in a religious sort of way. They kind of manifested themselves, or were thought of as having manifested themselves as gods, but they were also kind of devils. Incidentally, I've always seen the sphere builders as kind of a flip side mirror or an alternate version of the concept of the prophets from Deep Space Nine, partly because of the way they're presented. And like they're always appearing against these white backgrounds. They kind of give a feeling kind of like the prophets. And also some of those aliens early on, that cult-like group of aliens near the beginning of season 3, they looked a little bit like the Bajorans. But anyway, what's interesting in our discussion here is that incidentally, the prophets manifested themselves through orbs, which aren't spherical, but they use the word orb. And the sphere builders purportedly manifested themselves through spheres, which is basically a synonym for orb. So just one more fascinating connection to suggest to me that the writers may indeed have been very intentionally, as my initial intuition had been the first time I saw Enterprise Season 3, that the writers may have been intentionally creating kind of a counter concept, or even kind of backpedaling back from that very Christian-friendly kind of set of implications or associations that the symbolism of the DS9 saga could be seen as suggesting. Of course, I could be wrong on that, but I just keep seeing so many more things that keep on lining up with that. Anyway, and then one last note on spherical orbs as religious or spiritual imagery. Let me just give my disclaimer here that the sphere is one of the most basic and universal three-dimensional shapes to exist, and that if you regarded every spherical object to imply spiritual themes, then you would be up to your ears in things implying spiritual themes of a rather dubious nature, I might add. So I do recognize that I'm making a little bit of a self-fulfilling formula here in the sense that I'm only drawing attention to those spherical orb objects that do have religious or spiritual implications, and I'm leaving out ones that don't. So I'm referencing sphere builders and all these kinds of things, but I'm not referencing, for example, Borg spheres, or that round little musical toy that Tom found in the Voyager episode Friendship 1, or the Hirogen spiky spheres that we always see in the background of Hirogen ships, or let's say the Death Star from Star Wars, the various spherical ships and droids in the Star Wars universe. So I'm not referencing those because those are just spherical objects that are spherical because the sphere is one of the most basic shapes that there is. And so, some things just happen to be around, So there's my little disclaimer there of, let's be careful how we think about this kind of thing. All right, so that Q sphere matches their course and speed, and Picard asks Troi for impressions on what they just met. And she says, with kind of a bewildered look on her face, she says, "It felt like something beyond what we would consider a life form." Picard says, "Beyond?" She's like, "Very, very advanced, sir, or at least very, very different." Which I find an intriguing comment on a number of levels. On the one hand, this is the kind of thing that Star Trek characters do.